It's because you're not even like, it probably sounds so bad from me because, like in my head, it sounds so good. Don't make me feel bad about myself.
All right, sorry about the delay. Just my PowerPoint wasn't opening, so I'm all set now. Okay, so very quickly, I know lots of you have appointments with me. Either you had one today or in the next couple of days. If you do want to check out your midterm before the next one, spots are, I mean, it's there, guys. I turned it on. I'm just a little late. Relax. Can someone type in the Slido? Like, it's there. He's just running late. Like, I'm sorry. Anyway, yeah, make your appointments soon. All right. So we got a couple of things to cover as quickly as possible here, because I want to get as much onto midterm number 2 as possible. So we're going to finish up work, and we're going to start on sex and intimacy. So it should be fun. Okay, we finished off on this slide on Monday, right? We're talking about harassment in the workplace and our 2 major kinds, right? Quid pro quo and a poisoned or toxic work environment, and how work for women is often sexualized. Okay, couple more slides on work, and then we're on to a different unit. All right, so when it comes to workplace safety for young people, it is often something that is neglected. And our youngest employees in organizations are the most likely to be injured, killed or dismembered. No, I don't know about that. Death or dismemberment. Death or dismemberment. Sorry, it's strangely a running gag I have with my daughter about a Star Trek show that she likes. So yeah, our young workers are at the greatest risk of injury in the workplace, of workplace deaths, and all sorts of problems. Now, this stems from a bunch of things. Typically, the jobs they're doing are unskilled, right? So they're more likely to be doing physical tasks, manual labor, things that are very embodied, we'll say. Working the fry cooker at McDonald's, for example. And young people are the least likely to... What? The grease burn? Okay, I was about to talk about grease burns at McDonald's, so how apropos. Right. Young people are seldom unionized, right? Least unionized sector of the economy is young people. And, there's poor safety training because the companies that young people often work for don't want to invest in proper safety training because they're assuming high turnover. I remember, my first, I guess, not my first job, maybe my second or third job, I was working as a restocker at Safeway. And I remember the training, which, because it was hilarious, and thinking back on it, I can see why so many of my friends who also worked there got injured. The training was basically, they sat you in a back room, and, because this was the 90s, early 2000s, sorry, actually it's 2000, the year 2000. Hello, stick of lip gloss, you're still there. They sat me in a room with a TV, with a VHS machine, and they put in a cassette, which was their safety training video, and it was like, lift with your knees, not with your back. And when you're restocking shelves at Safeway, you do a lot of lifting, and a lot of my friends actually ended up with back injuries because they would try to lift stuff and didn't lift it properly. It was a requirement. They had to do at least a half hour of safety training, and they did it with basically a video cassette. Okay, so poor safety training is the first one. The next one, chaotic just-in-time working conditions. So this is especially true in things like fast food. So you get a lot of grease burns, right? Grease burns are the #1 injury that young people suffer at work, especially working in food prep. Why? Because a lot of these industries are what are called just-in-time, right? And just-in-time basically means you don't start filling an order until the order is placed, right? Because unless you are Burger King, you don't pre-prep your burgers. Yes, Burger King pre-preps his burgers. Burger King is disgusting. Never eat there. The 3 worst meals I ever had were the 3 meals where I was first forced to eat at Burger King because there were no other options. And I swear, they're the 3 worst meals I've ever had. So just in time, right? Think about it like this. McDonald's knows how many hamburgers they're probably going to sell, give or take, in a lunch hour, right? Because they have a ton of metrics that say this location is going to produce this many of this type of burger. But because A, they don't want to waste stock by throwing food out, and B, nobody wants a hamburger that's been sitting under a heat lamp for 30 minutes. Warm ketchup is not good. I will put it that way. They prepare them just in time, right? They basically, you place your order, they prep the food for you. So what this leads to is sort of very chaotic working conditions at certain times of the day, right? Probably at McDonald's, you're going to talk, let's say the lunch rush, it's probably something like 11 to 1:30. Whoops. And in this time, you're going to produce, a huge amount of food. Now, you could probably start pre-prepping some of that at 10:45, but they don't. So what happens is as, traffic increases, I'm never not shocked when I drive by a McDonald's at a random time of the day of how busy the drive-thru still is. I remember one time there were power outages in our neighborhood, and I'm like, I couldn't sleep because I was worried about stuff freezing and breaking, so I went for a drive. And I'm like, it's 2 o'clock. Maybe I'll go get some McDonald's. And there was like 45 people in the drive-thru. And I'm like, I'm never not shocked at how many people eat here all the time. All right, at these kinds of peaks, you're producing a lot of food, a lot of French fries. People are swirling around the kitchen, right? Moving really quickly, and grease burns happen. You're not wearing your grease-proof aprons or gloves or any of the things you should be wearing when you're dealing with hot oil. That's not aimed at him. I didn't know before. I planned this already. I didn't know he'd had a grease burn scar. Okay, so these kinds of conditions, right, where my laptop is acting up today. Okay, these kinds of chaotic conditions tend to lead to injuries. All right, and the other ones are crime, right? Young people are the most likely to be working in kind of lower tier retail jobs where things like robberies tend to occur, right? So they're more likely to be injured in a robbery than other people. And I mean, I remember, chatting up some of the cashiers at my local liquor store and asking them, like, why the heck are you guys open till 2 a.m? Like, doesn't that just cause problems? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. What happens at about 1:30 in the morning is people come in and they just walk out with as much liquor as they can physically carry. And it had become such a problem of cashiers trying to stop these people that the liquor store said, whatever you do, don't try to stop them. The liquor's insured, you're not, right? So, lots of crime and, being in a situation where someone's trying to rob, say, a liquor store or something else leads to problems. I think now that liquor store closes at like 10, which is probably much saner. Okay, young people also usually get blamed for their own problems, right? It's something about something they're doing, right? Oh, they didn't lift with their knees or something, right? We trained them, we gave them that 15-minute video. Why didn't they listen? Okay, how many slides do I have left here? Okay, 2, all right. So we already talked about this a little bit when we talked about education, so I won't belabor these points too much. But increasingly, those low-tier jobs in the labor market, right, low-tier service sector jobs, are demanding people with a post-secondary degree. And if you recall, I told you my horror story of Enterprise Rent-A-Car, where, frankly, I still to this day don't understand why they only, this was their point of pride. We only recruit people with a post-secondary degree. I'm like, why? Anyone could do this job. Anyone. On my worst day, it's still a pretty easy job. So increasingly we see, educational inflation. More people have degrees, right? Just think of Edmonton. Edmonton, when I was doing my undergrad, not that long ago, oh God, it was that long ago. I graduated in 2005. That's 20 years ago. Oh, I'm just going to go crawl into a coffin. I'm sorry. Like I'm basically a vampire at this point. But back then, there was one degree granting institution in Edmonton. It was the University of Alberta. Now there are 4. It's kind of. I mean, there's MacEwan. Stop it. MacEwan. There's King's. And there's the laughably named Concordia. Oh, sorry, Concordia University of Edmonton, so it doesn't get confused with the real one in Montreal. Right? Sorry, I don't know why I'm being mean to Concordia University of Edmonton. Just that it's garbage, that's all. I have friends who work there. I'll mock them later. Okay, so we have more degree granting institutions, which means more people with degrees, which means like anything, when you like money, when you print more of it, print more degrees, those degrees are worth less in the labor market, right? So we have educational inflation going on, just lowering the value of the degrees that people get. When they were, sorry, I saw it on Twitter, and I should never look at Twitter, but someone posted a comment that I low-key kind of agree with, that PhDs should be safe, legal, and rare. And I was like, yeah, actually, that sounds good, you know, as someone who already has one. As we get more people with things like bachelor's degrees, right, this whole master's isn't the new bachelor's degree becomes increasingly true, because that bachelor's degree is more like a high school diploma used to be, right, that base credential. And I mean, again, we talked about this when we talked about that shift in Gen X. You know, it started with the boomers, picked up in Gen X, and is now kind of the norm. Today, the purpose of education really has shifted from being about bettering you or making you like a well-rounded individual, connecting you with the civilization you're part of, or, you know, all that old-fashioned stuff, to just getting you that credential that helps get you a job, right? That gets you into the base of the labor market, not even into the upper echelons of it. I'm merely being depressing and repetitive at this point. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, very quickly on unemployment, right? I think I mentioned last time, youth unemployment tends to be about 2 times the average, or national average. So in Canada today, it sits at about 14.2. Unemployment, generally for young people, is generally a problem, and there's been lots of kind of longitudinal studies that have looked at the effects of unemployment on youth. These numbers come out of the UK, but there are similar kind of American numbers that I've seen. Okay, so long-term youth unemployment has long-term effects. For one, it leads to lower wages, and that will tend to follow you through life. So 6 months unemployment at 22, right, when most of you will get out of university, leads to an 8% decrease in wages at 23. And even 10 years later, your wages are likely to be 2 to 3% lower than if you had gotten a job right out of university. A year of unemployment at 22 decreases your wages by somewhere in the range of 13 to 22% 20 years later. Now again, this has some kind of interesting patterns, because like low SES people, right, people with less education are more likely to be unemployed for longer periods of time. So that unemployment due to low socioeconomic status follows them and, you know, leads to decreased wages long past that 1 year of unemployment. The other thing that we could talk about with unemployment, and this is true of younger and older workers, it has really negative psychological effects. And generally speaking, we see things like, you know, if the longer you're unemployed at any stage of your life, the more likely you are to manifest cardiovascular disease later in life. You know, it seems to put a general stress on you and your body. And people will tend to report less happiness, job satisfaction, lower wages, and generally worse health outcomes if they've been unemployed for long periods of time, especially as a young person. Okay. It's good to know that nothing ever changes or gets better. Yeah, I'm sure it's just like, watch this YouTube video that we have on our YouTube channel about how to lift boxes. Awesome. Perfect. That's the best comment to leave this unit on. Okay. Allow me to transition now. Okay. Oops. Okay, I think this is the same Slido, I think. I can't tell anymore. Okay, so I don't know why I picked this graphic. So we're going to transition here, and again, because I'm trying to move fast, I overdid the families thing. But the nice thing was I trimmed down this unit because there was a lot of overlap, things that I used to have in sex and intimacy. I talked about in family. Like I had a whole little section on TFR, and I'm like, wait, I've talked this topic to death. Let's not do it again. Okay, so we're going to talk a couple of topics with regards to sexuality and youth, and then we'll move on again. Okay. Wait, no questions? Perfect. Okay, so one of the trends that's pretty clear, and we saw this a little bit when we talked about, Jean Twenge's book, or her books, right? Both iGen and Generations. Young people today are having less sex than than millennials did at the same age, than Gen X. We need better names, people. Gen X did at the same age. And you can kind of see, these gradual shifts over a 10-year period. And this came out of an LA Times article where they were talking about this, right? If we look, things like this, right? 0 partners. Well, I guess let's do the big one. Number of sexual partners for Californians 18 to 30 reported in 2021 for the prior 12 months. What we see, right, is that almost half of men and a third of women had 0. One, it's about 60% of women and less than half of men, just a little bit more than 45%, had 1. And then, 11% of men and 8.6% of women had 2 or more. And we see these kind of numbers shifting over time, right? So if we look at this kind of, going back 10 years, we see that the number of, young Californians that had 0 sexual partners in the last 12 months, was kind of increasing, right? It's been increasing over time, over a decade. One partner has stayed kind of roughly the same. It hasn't changed a lot. And then the number that have had 2 or more partners has declined, right? It was relatively stable, and then 2019 hit, and it declined. And now these are probably COVID numbers a little bit. It's hard to have sex when you can't go outside and meet people. But, these trends are generally pretty stable. Okay. So I don't know, have I talked about Ryan yet? I probably have. These are graphs from my buddy Ryan Burge. He's my other best friend aside from Mark Rignaris. Also, I don't know him and I've never met him, but we are super best friends because I use this stuff all the time, especially in religion. And he put out a post about a year ago now talking about kind of patterns in sex, how much sex people are having. And basically the conclusion that we can draw is that we have 2 data sets here. Sorry. Was it something I said? 1989 to 1993 and 2016 to 2022, right? All of this is data from the GSS, General Social Survey. Okay, so I asked some weird questions on the General Social Survey. Share having sex at least once a month over the last year. And what we see is, in 1989 to 1993, basically, and we have it split between married and not married. Well, what we can say is married people, in general, tended to have more sex at all ages, right? So contrary maybe to the stereotype, married people have more sex, but there was a decline, right? between 1989, 1993, and 2016, 2022, the trend was downward, right? This orange line is lower down on the graph than it was before. For not married people, right, basically in our youngest part of the cohort, right around 40, it switches over where our not married people are having more sex than our married people, probably because that's when, I'm sorry, we're reading this wrong. It shifts over here. Your 40-year-old not married people now have more sex than not married people did back in the 80s and 90s. But this youngest part of the cohort, right, and that would be our Gen Z part, the numbers are considerably lower, right? Your kind of dots are a fair bit lower, down below 50% for our 20-year-olds. Even our 30-year-olds, right, are down, relatively compared to that earlier sample. So it looks like the general trend is that people are having less sex. And this is, the combined samples, married and unmarried. We see, right, more people in 89, 93 were having sex than people in 2016 to 2022. Those numbers are lower across the board. So it looks like, and sometimes this has been referred to by researchers as, I love this, the Great Sex Recession. People are just having less sex. Okay. And especially, right, in our youngest part of the cohort. Okay, well, and you expect old people, right, like above 60, you expect people to be less sexually active because you're old. So this is Ryan's commentary on this. And I call him Ryan because, like I said, we're best friends. So writing on this piece where he put those graphs up, we're wondering the same. I guess we're pondering the same thing right now. Why are folks having less sex today than they were in the 1990s? And he says, I don't think it takes too much imagination to conjure the most likely suspect: smartphones, right? Maybe sexual behavior is somewhat related to boredom. And I think that's certainly true, right? When we talk about, the comparisons to Gen X and to millennials with Gen Z, one of the things that's, I think, almost universally true is that millennials and Gen Z had a whole lot less to do, especially as teenagers, after school. So a lot of time, and their parents weren't around, right? So a lot of times, what did they do? Well, they hung out and maybe they ended up having sex, which probably accounts for some of those numbers. Today, there's so much to do. And I'm sure you've heard, the expression Netflix and chill, right, as an aphorism for inviting someone over to have sex. Well, I think it's increasingly clear that, it's just Netflix. There's no chilling going on. People just watch Netflix. That we have so much entertainment at our fingertips between video games, smartphones, streaming television. We have a world at our fingertips that doesn't even require us to leave the home. And I love this quote because in my heart of hearts, I have as you probably have noticed, I have a great affinity for Neil Postman. One of my great intellectual influences in my youth. And I always love when people cite his books. And here, Burge cites his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And his thesis in that book is pretty simple. Our addiction to amusement is what will lead to the decline of civilization. And I love this. For some, farming clicks and shares on social media gives us the dopamine hit that supplants feelings derived from sexual contact. And I love the closing thought. And I have to admit, that is a really bleak thought. Right, that somehow our devices are enslaving us. But more on that later, and causing us not to do things we otherwise might have done. Because instead of, you share pictures on Instagram instead of actually going and doing things. But again, more on that later in the course. Okay. We're going to do a hard right here to hookup culture. So we're going to talk about some of the changing sexual norms that have occurred. Now, hookup culture is very much a phenomenon that sort of emerges with the millennials and has carried through into Gen Z. And it has a few kind of notable qualities that we'll talk about and then discuss, some of the impacts of it. All right, now I'm going to do what I very rarely do in this class and show you a video. This is Donna. Donna Freitas. We are also best friends. I love her work. She's a great scholar. Not quite as much as I love Rodney Stark, Ryan Burge, or Mark Rigneris, but I do love Donna. Okay, now enough silliness. Oh, she's going to talk a little bit about her research on hookup culture, and she did some really cool stuff. She wrote 2 books on it, one called Sex and the Soul and one called The End of Sex, where she went to college campuses in the US, 4 different kinds of college campuses, non-religious, private, non-religious, public, Catholic colleges, and evangelical Protestant colleges, and asked young people about their sex lives, and had some really fascinating conclusions. And here she's going to talk about hookup culture and what it is, how it's defined, and
that I collected from students.
How people feel about it.
So, young adults believe they are supposed to be casual about sex in college. And so 45% of the students that answer this question about what do you think your peers think about sex at college, and 36% of the students at non-religious, private, and public institutions said, my peers are too casual about sex. So they made a differentiation between everybody else and themselves. Everybody is casual about sex, but I'm not. And then just about the rest of the students said, everybody on my campus is casual about sex. So they didn't make a judgment, they just said to be at college is to be casual about sex, though many of them don't feel that way themselves. Now I'm going to tell you, so the official social contract of the hookup, it really is, it's a social contract. So 1, it's anything from kissing to sex, and I mean that, anything from kissing to sex. It's a broad spectrum of sexual activity. We often assume it's casual sex or it's sexual intercourse, but it doesn't have to be. It might be, but it might not. It could be making out in the corner for 5 minutes, and the reason why is because students like a broad umbrella for what a hookup is because there's so much pressure to claim that you're a part of it. And so often hookups are a lot more innocent than they might sound because so many students, especially young men, feel like they need to be able to claim high numbers. The other thing that defines a hookup is that it's brief. Some people just assume one night stand, but it might literally just mean like 5 minutes in the bathroom. I know, very romantic, bathroom kissing. So, but definitely brief. And then the third one is the one that really trips students up. So you're not supposed to feel any emotion. You are not supposed to get attached. And so communication equals bad. So you're not supposed to communicate because if you communicate, you might actually start to care. Then the fourth unofficial one I'll add is alcohol. So many students that I talk to will say things like, without alcohol, nobody would ever get together. Without alcohol, nobody would ever kiss. So, what do college students say about their hookups? So the students who talked about their hookups from my study broke up in the following way. 41% of them talked about their hookups as making them profoundly unhappy. So they used words like, hookups make me feel unhappy, abused, sad, disgusted, duped. So a lot of sadness. And then there's these 23% who are ambivalent, and 36% who are more or less fine. And I put them almost together because there's really a fine line between the students who say they're ambivalent and the students who are just fine. And so the students who are ambivalent use the word whatever all the time, which is why I like to call them the whateverists. So they would say things like, hooking up is whatever, it's whatever, it's whatever. And so therefore they're the whateverists. And then you have this other group, they're the happiest bunch in the hookup crowd, I think, and they say that their hookups are fine. And that's it, they're fine. Not fantastic, not fabulous, but fine. And I think we often assume that a hookup is going to be this very exciting, wonderful, freeing experience of sexual intimacy where you're at a party and you see someone you think is hot and you tell your friends, look at the hot person, and then you go and you conquer the hot person and you're like, wow. And it's more like the way the students describe, you're drunk, you're at a party, you're sitting on the couch, it's 3 a.m, you're looking around. You don't know where your roommates went. You're tired. You don't know how you're getting home. You look next to you. There's this person. They look at you. You're like, all right. And so those are the fine, ambivalent sorts of hookups. Not so exciting. Which brings me to, hookups are efficient. Now let me explain that. That's not my language, that's the student's language. I remember the first time I heard that, I started hearing it a couple of years ago when a student told me, well, hookups are efficient. I remember thinking, efficient? You mean like a vacuum cleaner? So I think so that the students are getting, that group, that whatever's group in the middle, they're getting bigger. Students are getting more ambivalent about sex. They're getting better at the hookup contract, right? Because to not care is to be ambivalent, to be whatever about it. So hookups are efficient. And when you ask students what they mean by that, they will say, well, we're really busy. We're also overscheduled. We have such long to-do lists. We have so much to get done. Everything is go, go, go. We're always on, and everyone expects that of us. We have no time for relationships in college. We have been told by the forces that are. But we got to get our sex done, kind of like you got to get the dishes done. That's how they talk about it. And so hookups are efficient. So it's efficient sexual intimacy. So students on college campuses today, if you talk to them, they will often tell you that they believe hookups are their only option. And there's a lot of suffering in hookup culture. There's a lot of sadness. There's a lot of alienation. And the ambivalence that I see growing on college campuses around sex, I think, is a form of suffering. So I want to mention romance and dating, because in the middle of all this hookup culture and this hooking up and talking about how sad they are, how ambivalent they are, or how efficient hookups are, if you ask students today about dating, they get all excited. And so I asked every single student for my study, so what's dating like here? Do people date in college? And I got the same answer over and over again, which was something like the following. Nobody ever dates here. People don't date any college anymore, and we're not allowed to date. But then they would finish, but I wish they would. I would totally go on a date if someone asked me, or I would ask somebody out if it wouldn't be weird. And so I heard this so often, over and over again, this, there is no dating, but I wish there would be, that I got to the point where at the end of my interviews, I wanted to tell the students, listen, I know you think that nobody ever dates here. However, when you leave this room, someone is going to be waiting to come talk to me. If you think they're cute, you should totally ask them out, because believe me, they want to date you. If they're not your type, just come back. I'm here all week. So lots and lots of interest in dating, but lots of unfulfilled dating going on. So students want to date, they feel like they're not allowed to. And the other thing, and this is both men and women, by the way, everyone assumes women want to date, men don't, but both men and women want to date, and men will tell you this behind closed doors. The other thing they yearn for is romance. So much yearning for romance. And what I learned from students was, ironically, in the middle of hookup culture, romance is very chaste. Romance is talking. It's just talking. It is talking for hours, like 5 hours. So, and not just anywhere, not like in the hall of your residence hall. So it's talking for 5 hours in a really lovely place. Like ideally there's a picnic blanket, ideally there's stars, or perhaps 100 candles lit in the room. As a former res life person, I remember thinking, but you're not in your residence hall room because you might burn the hall down. And so lots and lots of yearning for romance. And if you remember, I said that one of the things that defines a hookup is no communication, right? No connection. Well, romance to students is connection. It is knowing and being known. It's having a lavish amount of time to do that. It is just talking. Now, here comes the quiz.
Okay. Have to make sure my sound is back on. Everything looks good. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So, very quickly, just so you have these points on a slide and you don't have to rewatch the video, right? The hookup, the official contract of the hookup. What is a hookup? Is anything from kissing to sex, right? And again, this is, I hate to use this term, but it is to increase the body count, right? Especially for young men, right? Having more hookups equals higher social status amongst peers. So it is all about increasing the number, which means you define it really broadly. It doesn't mean that everyone who says I hooked up with that person yesterday means they actually slept with them. It could be, but it's not necessary. Brief, right? It's meant to be efficient. And again, this is, lives are overscheduled, but they feel like part of the college experience, right? Part of going to college is sexual experimentation. I don't know if you can see that. This is a really tough picture. I love it because these are your Tinder matches. They look awesome, right? I've never been on Tinder. I never want to. Right, it's meant to be brief and efficient because it's just something else you have to fit into the college experience or the university experience, is all of those, sexual adventures you were told by the media you would have. Okay, I'm going to try a different color that actually works. Yellow? No. Looks great on my screen. There, purple works. Okay. This one's key as well. 0 emotional attachment. Don't get attached. Right? If it's going to be brief and efficient, relationships are anything but. So you're not meant to get attached. And alcohol, or sometimes weed. The other one that people mention is weed, which is, the lubricant, the social lubricant that lets you take down your inhibitions. Right? You probably wouldn't just walk up to someone you've never met and start making out with them normally, I hope. If you are that kind of person, seek therapy. No, I just walk up to random strangers and start making out with them. The alcohol sort of takes down your social inhibitions. It's not official, but everybody seems to know that that's part of hookup culture. Okay, and these numbers, I won't repeat too much, right? 2/5 are profoundly unhappy, a little less than a quarter are like, and a little more than a third are more or less fine. Not happy, it's fine. Okay, so other things that Freitas says in her books, is again, like she said, most students want a relationship, but it seems that kind of college culture and youth culture has prioritized away from them. And if you remember, right, you can see where this kind of fits in with things like our capstone model, right? That permanent relationship, the one that's going to be lasting, deep, and meaningful, is something you work towards, right? It's something that you're going to get once you've got the degree, right? You've got your BA, you've got your job, you've had your adventures, and then you get you get that meaningful relationship. So young people are being told culturally that youth is not the time that you're supposed to look for these things. College is a time for experimentation and other things like that. Now, for a lot of young people, however, they still want relationships, right? They still want to date. They, like Freitas said, they want to know people deeply and be known by them. And so hookups, because they have sort of displaced dating culture, right? No one ever dates. And in other books, Freitas and then another scholar called Carrie Cronin, have suggested that the kind of culture around dating has actually sort of broken down so that increasingly students don't know how to date, don't know how to ask someone out, right? And Carrie Cronin, who was a professor at Boston College, actually, had a class on dating and intimacy. And one of the projects for those who weren't in relationships was actually to go and ask someone on a date, and it has hilarious rules. Like you had to do it within the next week, right? So whenever the assignment was posted, you had to do it within the next week. So you couldn't dawdle too much. You had to do it in person, right? You had to actually go up to someone and ask them out on a date. And then the structures of the date were like, it had to be in a public place. It could be no longer than 90 minutes. You had to show up with 10 questions to ask the person. No alcohol or drugs. And it had to end. It couldn't end with anything other than an A-frame hug, right? That's how the date had to conclude. And the whole thing was like, leave them wanting more, right? For God's sakes, don't spend 4 hours with them on the first date. Let the poor person come back looking for more later. So, but this was an effort to kind of rebuild a culture around dating. Okay. But because dating has been deprioritized, you have this kind of weird echelon of alternate pathways to relationships that have emerged from hookup culture. So things like, and the pathway is often something like this. You hook up with someone. Okay, maybe, you don't mind that person, so you go to what Freitas calls multiple recurrent hookups, so sometimes more colloquially referred to as friends with benefits. And then you move to a phase where maybe one person, starts to, like the other person. This is referred to colloquially sometimes as catching feelings, which I always love because, you catch feelings like you catch the flu. It's an illness. There's a weird pathology in saying that you catch feelings, right? It's like a pathogen. It's poisoning you. You're sick now. Now, this is where most of these will end, right? Because once one person catches feelings, if the other person isn't interested and they were just in it for, that's pretty much where things end. And so, maybe they go on to date, and be a couple. But often it ends here with, things like this, ghosting, right? Where people stop responding, stop reciprocating because the other person, caught feelings. You can't see the whole graphic here, but I'm catching feelings. This needs to stop as quickly as my diet did when I saw cheese fries, is what that graphic says. Okay, I got 2 minutes. Oh, I have too many things to talk about. Let's do one more, and we'll see where we get. I'll try not to start 6 minutes late next time. My Slido wasn't working, so okay. All right. So what Freitas suggests, is the big problem is people don't know how to date, or they are afraid to date. They're afraid that it's going to be viewed poorly, or that it's the wrong time, or it's going to get in the way. So they don't date. They hook up, but a large percent don't like it. And this is just a graphic that was, from Duke, and the date was spring 2014. And you can see, right, that 76% of students wanted to be in a committed romantic relationship, but only 39% were, right? So there's a great disparity. And this was, where I think the graphic came from. Only 25% of women said they would feel comfortable asking someone out. And 42% of men said they would feel comfortable asking someone out. So there is a significant gap, between here and these numbers, right? So there's a lot of people probably wanting to be asked out or to ask someone out, but not feeling confident enough to do it. So, that's just Duke, but whatever. Okay, we'll pick it up here on Friday. We made good progress today. We should be able to finish this either on Friday or at very latest early on Monday, and then move into some midterm review for midterm number 2. I just finished marking midterm number 1. Oh, all right.
I felt when I started writing midterm number 2.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, have a great rest of your day. Oh.